I haven't partied in Snoop Dogg's place in the sandbox.
I feel like you're the CEO of Animoca. Like, how have you not jumped to the front of the line?
Yeah, my mom included.
When we catch up, drinks will be on you and you can pay with the ape coin.
Facebook was open.
Without regrets, nothing.
Hi, I'm Lisa.
And I'm Diego.
And welcome to the Superist podcast. So we're going to be talking about what's hot and what's not in the world of Web3. So today we have a very special guest. I think I'm obsessed with him, which is probably creepy to say because he's sitting on the call here waiting to be introduced. But he's actually the CEO of Animoca Brands, which is one of the world's biggest and most exciting Web3 companies. So they've invested in brands such as The Sandbox, Sky Mavis, which owns Axie Infinity, and OpenSea. And they've got an amazing mission to help bring property rights to gamers. So welcome to the show, Robby Yung.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
I actually wanted to start this. I don't know if Lisa, I don't know if I'm jumping the wagon here, but we of course we follow you and we follow everything that Animoca is doing right now. As someone that has lived in Hong Kong, I wish I had the chance to meet you guys in person, of course, but we still have time for that. You guys are just starting for what it would seem that there's a whole world ahead of you guys and everyone else. But I do want to start this with the first question. If you were to explain it to moms out there, including my own, how would you explain what is it that you guys do at Animoca and why should they care?
Sure. So I'd say we make games. That's what I usually tell people. We make games and we invest in companies that are building, I guess, what we think is the next version of the internet. And it's based on blockchain, and roughly speaking, what blockchain does is it gives you a financial underpinning to the internet. So basically, it makes things more secure, and it allows you to transact securely with anybody. Whether it's your friend or whether it's a company. And as a result of doing that, particularly for our industry, which is games and entertainment, it allows you to have a direct relationship with your customers. And so what we can do now, as Lisa said in her intro, is we can essentially give property rights to gamers because we can establish your property rights on the internet through the blockchain. So that the internet has gone from being a place that originally was designed solely for the dissemination of information in the widest possible scale, to a place, and the result of that was that there was no digital rights management whatsoever, because the purpose of the internet originally was to just as a PR medium, essentially, to get information out there as widely as possible, without a thought to the idea that it would be protected for exclusivity. So we ended up with lots of news websites with paywalls and other sort of clunky hacks to try to figure out how to protect copyright. And blockchain gives us a way to do that finally. So if we can establish your digital property, then it has value and it should be paid for. And part of your digital property is your personal information and your data and your ID. And that's something that we've all now kind of taken for granted, over the last decade, the lack of privacy and the fact that our personal information gets monetized mainly for the benefit of some big companies, in exchange for quote unquote free stuff. But I think if you look at the kind of data that you offer about yourself in exchange for those free services, they're not so free after all. And we may be getting the short end of the stick.
Yeah, it's actually interesting because I know that you talk about how it's kind of work when we're like, I go on TikTok and LinkedIn for hours at a time. So I'm like obviously working really hard, but like you're right. Like we're actually doing things to make people like Mark Zuckerberg rich. But I think one of the most exciting things about Web3 is that it puts that ownership back in the hands of creators. And I just love for you, and I've obviously listened to a lot of your podcasts, but I love the way that you talk about the opportunity that that concept of decentralization brings to the world.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's the important thing about decentralization, I think, is something that we actually see now when there are, massive global events underway, and we think about this whole idea that we laugh at this term fake news, that it feels like Trump coined. I don't know if he did or not, but he popularized it, and the idea that the arbiters of what's true and what's not end up being in very tightly controlled hands, and when you see how governments use that, or tightly controlled media uses that for good or for ill, when you see the bad side of it, centralization is a little bit scary. And like I was watching a program on TV yesterday, and I'd completely forgotten that Ceausescu was only overthrown in Romania in 1989. I mean, I was obviously not paying attention because, to be honest, I was already in university at that time. But, to think that that kind of fascism was still around as recently as that is kind of scary. And so, you know, decentralization, while it's not, I don't think it should be taken as a sort of a religious mission. I do think that it's a wonderful sort of democratizing factor in how we use the internet. And I think that's how it should be seen.
That's awesome. You said you guys have a mission with the new world of gaming. I remember listening you saying that one of your predictions was that every game was going to be built on the blockchain
Hmm.
soon enough.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
And one thing that I always joke about is how take going 20 years back. And I used to spend the vast majority of my teen years playing RPGs. And it was actually my first ever hustle. I level up my characters and sell my characters. My dad thought it was drug money, but no, it was just RPG money. And I always joke about the fact that my mom, which was the question, right? My mom would be concerned that we're spending that much time playing games, and that games were this like very niche sort of like market back then. But then my mom got into Candy Crush, for instance, right? And suddenly gaming got widely just accepted in all forms, shapes, and forms, right? We started seeing professional gamers come up and everything else. And I always say, I wish back then my time put into games were actually being monetized, right? Tokenized or whatever it was. But it's not something completely new as well when we look at Steam and how Steam you can sell your items on the marketplace and such. So my question in that regard would be, do you think that the aspect of gamification is something we're going to see way beyond games as well and go into many other parts and sides of companies?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, everything is all more things are gamified than you realize, frankly. I mean, people are hacking your brain to try to convince you to do things all the time. That's what modern marketing science really is. And game developers have taken advantage of that, particularly since the advent of free-to-play business models, where essentially you have to bring customers on a journey and sell them stuff in a game. And I think it will continue to a certain extent, but I think it will be a lot, in my opinion, less um, predatory, because when, in the business models that we're starting to create now with blockchain games, it allows the content creator to benefit from the ongoing trading revenue of NFTs, like playable in-game content, over time, because every time it's traded, we can get a small commission. And so what that means is that there's a very long, essentially, royalty stream, similar to what the music industry has had for a very long time. That you get royalties when your song is played in a public venue, and when you think about that, it means that you can, as the creator, have a benefit to the creation of that IP for a very long time, and it so therefore you can be less predatory about how you sort of shove it down people's throats to begin with the first go round, and how much you charge the first time around, because you'll always capture that long stream, right? Because if you just went out as a music artist and said, okay, my first concert, the very first show, I'm going to charge $10,000 a ticket, nobody would go to your show because that's a ridiculous idea. But because the music will play on for years, you can be more equitable in how you charge for it because you have a long tail of revenue.
It's actually interesting that you bring up music, because I remember listening to one of the podcasts that you were on, and you were talking about how it's, the technology has the opportunity to decentralize, or actually, sorry, democratize things like entertainment. So say if you're trying to go to a Justin Bieber concert or something, I'm a big Justin Bieber fan. I don't know if I should have said that. Hopefully I can edit this out. But, previously you might not even get a ticket because they get sold out. Or it could be in a country that you might not even be able to get to because you don't have the funds, or we're in a pandemic. Whereas now, Justin Bieber can jump on to a metaverse and perform. And, the three of us around the world could jump on and, be front row and hang out together and enjoy the music. So I think that concept is actually really exciting, because it now means that, and I think, I always hear this, people get scared when they hear about things like the metaverse because they're worried that it's going to change the way that we interact as humans, and we're going to spend more and more time on the internet. But what are your thoughts around that?
Well, when I was growing up, my mother used to tell me the same thing about television. So you watch too much TV and
Too close to the screen.
yes, your
Yeah,
brain is
and now
going to
you have
melt
your
and all this
nose
kind
and
of stuff.
yeah.
Exactly. And well, to be honest, I don't know if that's true or not, because I don't know if I would have turned out better if I hadn't watched so much TV. So that's hard to say. But I do think that those kind of warnings are often reluctance to change, because embracing something very new is difficult. That said, I do think that there's merit in being careful of screen time, to be honest. As a parent, especially, I can say that, because I do think it's important we have balance in our lives. I wouldn't recommend to anybody to spend all day long in the metaverse, just because, yeah, it's nice to go outside occasionally. But I agree with you. I think what we're seeing is, you know, the metaverse is a term that's been widely popularized in the last year, particularly. It's kind of been a hot topic, and often I get asked what is the metaverse, and I think that the metaverse is actually not anything particularly new. It's really just the idea that the internet is, you know, the internet is an amazing place, but what we've lacked in the internet is cohesion to date, because websites are not actually connected. You can basically go from address to address and you're bouncing around on different websites, but they're just disparate websites out there. And so to me, the definition of the metaverse is simply the idea of them all being connected, not connected to the internet, but connected to each other. And so when you can start to share experiences and have a relationship between adjacent content, then I think that's a really interesting idea, and that's essentially what we sort of get at with the metaverse. So it doesn't have to be a three-dimensional virtual reality. I mean, we'll get there eventually, but I think for the moment it just means what happens to your content if it lives next to other content, and what does that mean for it?
I'm sure that Lisa was gonna ask something similar. Um, but as a gamer, and as a matter of fact, a pretty good one. If you guys ask me, but um, as a gamer, and I have kids as well, so I don't game anywhere near as much as I wish I could. But not complaining about my quality time with my family, just mind you that. There is a thing that we see. On gamers being a little bit resistant to change, all in all, right? I think that there's I don't know if it's a joke or if it's actually true that the founder of Ethereum actually did so because they removed the damage from a spell in World of Warcraft, and he was tired of centralization. And so, how do you see things going forward for gamers, knowing that there is a big resistance in the market to games that are NFT based, that do work on tokenizing, and monetizing itself and such and such.
I'd say there's actually not a big resistance. I'd say there's a resistance amongst a small number of people who are disproportionately vocal about their resistance.
The few and the loud.
Exactly. And I think that we've seen objections like this in previous generations of change in gaming. When we moved to free to play, There were lots of objections. People said, games should just be purchased up front, and charging for things in games was unconscionable. We had a
Loot
lot of,
boxes, right?
yes, and we had a lot of people complaining about mobile. Remember, everybody said, "Oh my God, how can you put a game on a mobile phone on this tiny screen? It's going to be horrible," right? Absolutely horrible.
Yeah, to this day, a lot of gamers say that mobile gaming is not real gaming, right?
Yeah,
That doesn't
exactly.
count.
But like 4 billion people don't seem to mind, right? So
Yeah, my mom included.
yeah. So what's the best thing that ever happened to gaming? The mobile phone, right? Seriously, that's without doubt, that's the best thing that ever happened to the game industry. The game industry was tiny, and now it's the biggest, it is the entertainment industry, thanks to smartphones. So I think what we're seeing now is, again, reluctance to change because the critiques that we see are actually relatively hollow. People criticize the idea that blockchain games are focused on monetization. First of all, no, not entirely, although some are. Um, but secondly, traditional games are extremely focused on monetization. So therefore, blockchain games are no different. They're just other kinds of games. And I think also criticism of an industry that's still basically in year one of mainstream adoption, is not terribly warranted just because we're still trying to get the bugs out. And I think the products you see in the market today are more experimental in nature than they are mature products. So I think if you really want to make a fair comparison, wait 2 more years.
Yeah. So before you lay into games like Axie, just give them a chance to work out what's going on. I think it's actually quite crazy because those games or games like Axie have no roadmap at all. So they're just trying to work out what's going on. And, I think from a business perspective, you guys are almost the same as well. Like you're going down a path that really there's no precedent for, which is really exciting. But I would love to know what got you into Web3, because you're an OG, like you're in it for a long time. So you're coming up to around 8 years at Animoca. I hope Yat has something really exciting planned for your 8th anniversary. But I think people, even Diego and I talk to people all the time now, and firstly they're still like, what's Web3, and also NFTs are a scam. But you guys obviously saw the vision really early on, and we sort of had a chat about this before as well. So I'm based in Australia, and the ASX actually kicked you guys off in 2020 for involvement in cryptocurrency related activities, which is like really awkward now because you're worth billions of dollars. But what made you actually get in and go, hey, this is the future. This is what everyone should be doing?
I think it was, so we got involved at the end of 2017, just after the sort of infamous ICO summer when lots of crypto companies raised money through ICOs. And we became friendly with a small startup in Vancouver because we were actually acquiring another company in Vancouver. And like most great things in life, a lot of this had to do with luck. And so we got to know this small company, and they were working on a hackathon project, and that hackathon project was CryptoKitties, which turned out to be the first blockchain game, and they wrote the NFT standard for Ethereum in order to create CryptoKitties, and we published CryptoKitties in Greater China together with them, and I think it took us, I've said this before, I think it took us maybe a month to decide to just pivot the whole business to focus on this, because once you embrace the idea that content can be owned by users, and in-game currency can be tradable outside of the game, then it just makes logical sense. Because at the end of the day, what we do with tokenization, meaning putting things on the blockchain, is we just give people what they are already doing in games in a better way, right? Because when you play a game today, like any freemium game, you buy in-game currency, you put in your Apple Pay or your Google Pay, and you buy in-game currency, and then you spend the in-game currency to buy stuff in the game. That's how you spend money in games. And in a blockchain game, it's exactly the same. You buy an ERC20 fungible token as your in-game currency, and then you buy NFTs in the game. Exactly the same, with the exception that you can take all that stuff outside the game, and you can trade it with other people, and you can sell it, and you can have ownership and over all of your stuff. Whereas in a traditional game, you're trapped inside a rental economy. And I think that, for anybody who's had the privilege to be able to, for example, own their own home, um, I think it's one of those things that you never really understand until you do it. Because, from the moment that you live on your own, you're a renter and you only know one way of doing things. And you can never really appreciate home ownership for what it's worth until you actually own your own home. And then once you do, you look back at the past and you're like, why was I renting? That made no sense. Um, but you don't understand it until you do it. And we think blockchain games are the same, right? People who are playing games today don't understand, well, why, who cares if there's inflation in my game, you know? Um, but actually, once you can own your stuff in the game and sell them to other people, and the first time you do that and it works, you're like, wow, I can get something back. Why was I playing games for years and spending money and getting nothing back when I was being told I got fun, right? And that's kind of like being told in Facebook that you get all that free information on your news feed, right? But actually, no, it's not that free, right? And perhaps you should be, getting more in return.
I actually want to know, firstly, this is a two-part question. So firstly, obviously, Animoca's invested in the Sandbox, which is one of the most exciting metaverses in play at the moment. So firstly, have you partied in Snoop Dogg's mansion in the Sandbox? And secondly, what advice do you have for brands looking to enter the metaverse? Because I feel like, we're having conversations with brands all the time and they're like, do we buy land? Do we lease land? Which metaverse? So what advice do you have for them?
I haven't partied in Snoop Dogg's place, the Sandbox. There's a really long queue to get in, I'm
I
afraid.
feel like you're the
Um,
CEO of Animoca. Like, how have you not jumped to the front of the line?
I know, because customers first. But I think when it comes to brands, there are different ways that you can approach, sort of putting together a Web3 strategy. I think the most important thing to think about is it's like any other marketing strategy. You're trying to connect with customers. And so you're trying to figure out, how do I embrace this new medium to connect with customers who are also embracing this medium? Just like everybody had to come up with, a Facebook strategy and a TikTok strategy and a Snapchat strategy as these new mediums emerged. Um, and so when it comes to a metaverse strategy, I think one of the reasons the Sandbox has had some resonance with brands is because there's a community there, and it's a big community, and they're very passionate about what they do. They're very engaged in the platform, and engaged communities are the most, interesting from a brand standpoint if you can connect to them because they are engaged. They will tend to spend more and be more loyal, et cetera, et cetera. So on that front, also the Sandbox being a user-generated content metaverse is a relatively straightforward metaphor for people to understand, because it's just like the physical world, right? You buy land, you make something cool on your land that people want to go and participate in, and then they will come and you can engage with them there. And it matters, what neighborhood you're in and who your neighbors are and things like that, as to how you can attract visitors to your land. So I think that part has been relatively straightforward for the Sandbox. I think also brands can engage with consumers directly. So we do see a lot of brands figuring out how to use, for example, collectible NFTs as a medium, or playable NFTs, or creating games, in order to engage consumers. But I think first and foremost, they need to think about their demographic targets, and they need to think about how to embrace them, sorry, connect with them while embracing the medium. And I say that because there's a spirit and an ethos to Web3, which I think you're probably aware of, that is a little bit different than the spirit of Web2 and It's actually more like the original Web 1.0, where people in Web3 they tend to be extremely collaborative, and we share a lot. We're not highly competitive with each other. We're not sharp-elbowed. Um, and we even have slogans like "We're all gonna make it," right? Because that's part of that collaborative spirit. Um, and so I think, and as a result, you know, it's also reflective of the sort of younger generation of people who are sort of pioneering Web3, where they tend to have a very you know, how do I say this politely? A strong BS meter, because there are lots of scams out there. And so they're very savvy to be able to figure out fake people from real people. And that applies to brands as well. So I think engaging with consumers in a highly authentic way, in their medium, I think is what's ultimately appreciated the most.
Yeah, I think that's the challenge at the moment. Because I mean, I look at NFTs and they're still obviously not super mainstream, but projects like Bored Ape has done a great job to actually get people's attention. But I think the fact that they're selling for millions of dollars it's a good thing because people are like, how is a JPEG of an ape selling for so much money? But then I think it's also in some ways it's not a bad thing, but I think people are still struggling to grasp the concept of what that, what an NFT is. And trading on OpenSea, I saw a stat that it's dropped 80%, 80% since February. Do you think that people should be worried, or is this just like the natural flow of new things in the market?
I saw a great tweet today, and I can't remember who sent it, but they were talking about, the Bored Ape community recently launched the Ape Coin, which got a lot of press over the last few days in our space. And they did an airdrop of ape coins to all the people who own Bored Apes. And I think roughly the average token value, like US dollar equivalent value of tokens that was dropped to an individual, as dropped meaning given free to the holder of those Bored Ape NFTs, was anywhere from 80,000 to 200,000 US dollars equivalent value. And the tweet was great because he was talking about how, there was a big criticism of NFTs, and there's a big movement of people saying, well, art NFTs particularly, are just JPEGs, and so I don't need to buy the NFT. I can just right click on it and save it. And he said, well, for those of you who didn't get your $200,000 worth of ape coin in the airdrop, I bet you're regretting just right clicking now,
Oh, absolutely.
because that's the difference.
Yeah.
And I know that you have an ape, so I'm guessing when we catch up, the drinks will be on you and you can pay with the ape coin.
Well, I think what this is also is it's a hint as to what's different about Web3, because the idea of, and the Bored Apes are probably, like Axie Infinity, they're kind of a bellwether project of a certain type. But what they've done spectacularly is to really build a community. And they've built the community around this idea that owning an ape means something. And when you think about it, it's not really a new playbook. A Bored Ape is a luxury good, right? And it means something to drive a Ferrari. It means something to wear a Rolex. It means something to have a Bored Ape. And they've managed to build community out of that shared ownership of what it means to have an ape. And it's no different than when you see people who own the same type of dog or drive the same kind of car, etc. There's that shared passion for your interest. And they've done this spectacularly now, obviously, with the launch of the ape coin, because that's, I think, there's a lot more to come. But it's the first step. And I think they've done it in a way that engages the community, in a way that the community is open to and expecting, and adds value to the community.
I saw something about this guy that owns a few Bored Ape assets, opening his own restaurant chain, with his own using his NFT sort of like IP for kind of like a branded sort of like theme, right? I thought it was really cool. It really seems to me that Yuga Labs has almost like Web3 already, like it's basically paving the way
Yes.
as you guys are, because it seems that they like everything that they do is just a huge success, huh? Like from like every single thing, the mutant serum and everything else is just insane.
Yes. And I think, like anything else, it just shows you that they're masters of the medium, and they figured out the medium a little bit like, I guess Shakespeare figured out how to use the English language, or, something like that, where there are certain groups that really excel at figuring out how to embrace the medium, because they're kind of flexing it in a way that other people haven't figured out yet. Just the same way as Lisa, you were talking about the Axie Infinity, the Sky Mavis team with Axie Infinity. So, they have done that in a way that essentially they continue to innovate in order to solve problems, to solve scaling problems, to solve inflation problems, or whatever it is in their game ecosystem. As they grow and have unexpected success, they've had to figure out how to solve those problems. They ended up making their own wallet and their own blockchain, right, just to solve problems.
And even just understanding the fact that it's open, I was listening to you talk about how someone built the ability to create guilds because people couldn't jump in and afford to buy into Axie straight away because you have to pay for the Axies. And I just thought that's actually incredible. And the fact that things are open in Web3 means that there's going to be so much innovation. Because I sort of think, imagine if Zuckerberg made Facebook open, imagine all the cool things that could have been done.
Here's a reminder, and maybe this is me showing my age or you not showing your age, but Facebook was open,
Really?
right? So originally, when Facebook first started trying to attract game developers, it was open, and that was the famous battle between Zuckerberg and Mark Pincus from Zynga, because Zynga was the biggest game developer on the platform, and then Facebook, once the platform generated enough audience and enough users, then they took it away from the game dev community and they closed it off, and they closed up the drawbridge behind them, cut off all the game developers and kept the users.
Whoops. That was like
Wow. Wow.
Well, fortunately, that kind of behavior hasn't persisted.
definitely. I think Zuckerberg might be regretting that now, like the ASX are regretting kicking you guys off.
That's centralization, and I think that's what people like game developers are concerned about, because we've talked about this publicly, about this idea of deplatforming. The ASX is a perfect example, right? The decision as to whether we stayed as a listed company on the ASX or not was down to a few individuals. Just like in a previous life over a decade ago, we were kicked out of the Apple App Store, and that was a terrifying moment for us, because basically what happened was from one day to the next, we went into the office and we were making millions of dollars a week at that point in time. And then and we had 150 people working for us, a big payroll. And then one day we came into the office and zero, like, because we had an Apple account and all our games were shut down. It was a single point of failure. And the hardest part about that kind of a relationship with a company like that is that, unlike, the out in the public world where you have police and courts and law and due process, in the App Store, there's no due process. It's just whatever they want to do. They don't even have to let you know they're going to do it. They just do it because they do whatever they want to do for whatever reason they want. They don't even need to tell you why. And to this day, they've never told us why.
Was that the most stressful day of your time at Animoca?
It was one of them. It was one of them. But these things happen and they teach you things, right? And you learn. And if we hadn't had that experience, maybe we wouldn't have embraced the idea of using blockchain as much as we did at the beginning. So I think it's these kind of experiences.
It just proved a point even more.
Yeah, these
Yeah.
these experiences form your opinions and give you an appreciation and understanding for things.
Okay, this is like a really random question because I'm thinking about that day and I would have just absolutely just shat myself if that happened. What do you actually what do you actually do every day? Like what's a typical day in the life of running like one of the world's most exciting Web3 companies?
Battles multi-trillion-dollar companies on a day-to-day basis, and then just makes the coffee and goes
Well,
through with
because
your
it's
day.
11 p.m. It's almost midnight, so kudos to you for jumping on and doing an interview with us. I'd be fast asleep by now.
It's not as glamorous as you might think, and I think maybe again I'm showing my age. I do a lot of email. I still really like dealing with people on email, despite all the text chats I have. But I think I divide my time relatively equally between doing M&A. So we're continually growing our studio business and looking to acquire great studios. We recently acquired one in Melbourne, called Grease Monkey Games, and also looking at I spent the other half of my time looking at our strategic investment portfolio. So constantly meeting with promising startups. And I think that's actually, one of the most fun parts of my job, just because I get to meet so many interesting people, and they pitch their ideas, and you get to learn so much about what people are doing, and and just it's just like a wealth of creativity and fresh ideas. So that's I think a really exciting part about the business.
Yeah, and I was gonna ask because again, and I'm gonna keep bringing this back because I am a gamer in case anyone wants to know. I'm a pretty good one. But we do Robbie. We do have companies. We have triple A game companies that fall from grace, right? We have EA, for instance, that has created quite a bad rap for trying to, in every possible imaginable way, monetize the gaming experience, right? Selling, a gaming pieces and blah blah blah, and loot boxes and all that kind of stuff. How do you, most especially, how do you discern? Or how do you separate a gaming company that you yourself would be like, oh, this is a cash grab, and another one that is truly passionate about the ethos and everything that you were talking about before?
Good question. I think it'd be challenging to know. I guess it's a bit like getting to know somebody. It's very difficult, I would think, to be able to figure that out on day one. You'd have to take a look at a pattern of behavior, I think, to really get to know whether it's real or not. Um, so I think that's one thing that we've been very careful about or meticulous about, is really trying to craft our reputation within Web3, because we understand how valuable that is. And so I think we try very hard to make sure that all the companies that we work with really see the value that we add, and the strategic partnership that we add. When we launch projects, we don't do the so-called rug pull projects, because people know that we don't sell tokens, and we're not out there to profit from our customers, because, you know, at the end of the day, we're long-term players. We genuinely believe this is the very beginning of something that's exciting, that's going to last for, potentially decades. And so there's no need to try to achieve short-term profits, because at the end of the day, everything we invest in will get bigger over time, because we're at the beginning.
Well, thank you so much, Robbie. We probably should let you go to bed, even though we could probably just keep talking to you for ages. Just to wrap up, I want to say, what can we expect from Animoca for the rest of the year? But given it's Web3, it almost be like right to say, what can we expect for Animoca today? Because I think things happen so quickly. But what can we expect over the next coming months from you guys?
We've got some exciting launches. We've been soft launching Phantom Galaxies, which is made by Blowfish in Sydney, and that's a big launch for us this year. It's the first AAA blockchain game, and we are putting more stuff out there in our Riv Racing ecosystem. You'll see a new title from the MotoGP IP for those of you who like superbike racing. And then we've also announced previously that we're creating a game together with Yuga Labs for the Bored Apes, so that will be coming out as well. So yeah, lots of exciting stuff, and as you said, that's just in the next few months.
That's exciting. Well, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to have a chat with us. We really appreciate it, and we'll put the links to your socials and to Animoca socials in the show notes. Definitely give Robbie a follow. I'm sure he's got plenty of alpha that he's going to be dropping over the next couple of months. And yeah, thanks again, Robbie.
No problem. It was great to talk to you.
Thank you, Robbie. You're the man.
Thanks. Take care.